Good afternoon, dear friends. I am very glad to see you and introduce our close friends from Bulgaria. This is a doctor Теодорічка Готовської-Генце from Institute of Historical Researches. It's an institution of Bulgarian Academy of Science. She is a foreign lecturer and expert of our project Infrastructure that have united Europe. Today, госпожа Готовская give us the lecture, The Shaping of the Soviet Bloc, the internal context, domestic influences, 1945-1949. Today, it will be first part of this lecture with an emphasis of situation in Balkans in the 1945-1947. Госпожа Готовska prepared for us very interesting presentation. I will help with it. I invite lecturer to give the speech with a big pleasure, and I began demonstrate presentation.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Hello once again to everybody. I am very happy to have a chance to speak about these problems. And I'm very thankful to Professor Mikolenko for his help showing the PowerPoint. It makes my task easier. So let's start. We know that the socialist countries, they had planned economies and one-party system. And in order to implement this system, there had to be before a communist grip of the whole power. And so we'll look today how it was done. And this first part of the lecture will deal with the Balkans, with two Nazi-allied countries, what Bulgaria and Romania were, who are going to be the first countries outside Soviet Union that time who implemented this communist system. And since this was done up to the end of the war, that's why we have to look also at the international context in order to find out what correlation it had with the domestic move to the power of the local communists. And so I'll mention just the conferences, but not everything what the Allied powers agreed on, but only the things, the decisions which were concerning the Balkans. And of course, we start with the Tehran conference held at the end of 1943. And among many issues which were discussed there, military and political, the most important to Stalin, of course, was the question when and where the second front will be opened. And this was under code name Operation Overlord. And on this meeting of the big threes, Churchill proposed his Mediterranean plan, which was mainly to help from South Yugoslavia and to open the second front along the Danube. How he said, extend our right hand along the Danube. But unfortunately for Bulgarians and for the Romanians again, he was in minority, and his proposition, his plan was not taken in consideration, and the big three, they agreed on opening the second front in Normandy, which was decision opening vast place of Europe to the coming Soviet troops. And after Tehran, it was clear that all Eastern Europe and the Balkans as well would be liberated from the Soviet army. About the political dimensions of presence of Soviet troops in these countries, I'll speak later. Now I'm just mentioning that this was the first very important decision which predestinated the fate of these two countries. And the second conference, which also had a very big importance to the future of the countries which were going to be included in the Soviet bloc, this was Yalta Conference. One speaks about the post-war Eastern Europe, that the post-war Eastern Europe was developing in the shadow of Yalta up to 1989. Now, among the decisions, there were different political decisions as well, but the most important was, of course, the Declaration of Liberated Europe, which the big three issued at that time. And the main point was, in all liberated from Nazi occupation or from Nazi allied governments, in all these liberated countries, there had to be free and democratic elections. And for this reason, that is going smoothly and democratically, the three power allied control commissions were to oversee exactly the establishment of new governments. But anyway, by that time, early 1945, it had been recognized both from the British and from the Americans that Eastern Europe and, of course, Balkans be a legitimate Soviet sphere for influence. And it was again bargain for this British and the Americans got a free hand in other regions like, say, Latin America, Japan, or the Middle East. Now, already by that time, the American President Roosevelt had been very bitterly attacked for selling Eastern Europe. But it's true, he didn't have genuine interest in Eastern Europe, but we have to keep in consideration it was still war. And as a matter of fact, by that time, the Allied Western troops, they were still west from Rhine, and the Soviet troops were slightly 100 miles, 100 kilometers far from German capital, from Berlin. So one could say the troops and the position of these troops influenced very much the major political and post-war influence this country would have in each part of Europe, Eastern or the Western. So Europe was divided, as you see, at Yalta, but then the post-war fate of the Balkans had long been sealed. So we'll come back before Yalta to another agreement. Collega Mikolenko, please, slide 2. We'll speak now on slide 2, yes. And now this is not a conference, this is personal agreement done by British Prime Minister and the Soviet Generalissimo on 9th of October, and it's called, it's like, so in the history, entered the history with the name, the Percentage Agreement. And it was done in the autumn 1944, and by that time, Soviet troops, they were already not only in Romania, but on 5th of September, after 5th of September, also in Bulgaria. And now I would like to quote the original text from the memoirs of Churchill. I think it will give good idea how this agreement was done. So after dinner, Churchill told to Stalin, I quote, "Let us settle about our affairs in the Balkans. Your armies are in Romania and Bulgaria. We have interests, missions, and agents there. Don't let us get at cross purposes in small ways. Okay. So far as Britain and Russia are concerned, how would it do for you to have 90% predominance in Romania, for us to have 90% of the say in Greece, and go about 50-50 about Yugoslavia?" While this was being translated, I wrote out on half a sheet of paper. This, what you see. I pushed this across to Stalin, who by then had heard the translation. There was a slight pause. Then he took his blue pencil and made a large tick upon it and passed it back to us. It was all settled in no more time than it takes to set down. So I think it's very convincing, the text. Now, let's say the authors, I mean Western authors, they give different explanation, but it doesn't change the situation then in this very simple fashion, person to person. Stalin and Churchill mapped out their spheres of influence in the Balkans. Now, later, I have also from the memoirs, but the British Prime Minister explained later that these percentages were not intended to prescribe the numbers sitting on commissions. It's allied commissions which had to be implemented for the different Balkan countries, but rather to express the interest with which the British and Soviet governments approached the problems of these countries. As a matter of fact, you could see the original sheet in internet with one difference, where Yugoslavia percentages 50-50 were, there's a question mark. So Churchill was not absolutely sure Stalin will agree. But obviously this was the case, and they settled their conversation and their issues very smoothly and very quickly. So no comment, it's clear Churchill handed Romania and Bulgaria to Soviet domination, keeping Greece, of course, for the West, and agreeing to share Romania and Hungary. You see, Hungary is not a Balkan country. Why Hungary? Of course, because Romania and Hungary, they're laid on the road of the Soviet troops to the West, to Germany. So later, Churchill claimed that this was informal and temporary agreement meant only to do until the end of the war. But we know it proved remarkably durable, reflecting as it did the real distribution of power by that time in the region. Now, some authors say Churchill was not conscious about the reality of growing Soviet power in Europe. I should say I disagree with this. Rather, in my opinion, he was hurrying up to set a bargain with Stalin exactly because he was there and he said, your armies are in Romania and Bulgaria. So it was really hot spot to make an agreement not to go in crossways, as he said. So there's no denying that this smoothly and quickly solution of the problem was at least partly possible because Churchill and Stalin had very similar mindsets. It was a calculated bargain in old tradition of the power politics, and it was not the first time this was done concerning the Balkan countries. So under this condition, it's not amazing that assertion of communist control began already during the war. And now we'll move to slide 3 to see, to look closer at the two countries who are going to be included in the Soviet bloc. Both were more agrarian countries, predominantly agrarian countries, which were with a not effective industry sector and background countries compared to the other European countries. Both were kingdoms, monarchies. In Romania, there was King Michael II. In Bulgaria, the King Boris III died in 1943. So the 11-year-old King of Simon II, still alive, there was a regency there after 1943. Now, both of them were, of these countries, they're allies of Nazi Germany. But let's say allies involved in a slightly different degree. Let's say in Romania, the fascist movement had a bigger social impact. There was Iron Guard under General Antonescu. In Bulgaria, there was also fascist movement, but compared to Romanian counterpart, it was not that strong. And both last democratic governments, they tried to shift the fronts. Both of them sent people to negotiate with the Western allies in Cairo, in Egypt. They tried to make armistice with Western powers in order to prevent entering the entrance of the Soviet troops. But of course, at that time they didn't know the bill is already set and the percentages are also set. So these negotiations brought nothing. The Soviet army was proceeding south, and the more territory, the more complete Soviet control would be over the territory, the more communists got stronger. And on 5th of September, then the army declared war at Bulgaria, crossed the Danube, and entered Bulgarian territory as well. Now, let's say some words about Red Army factor. Of course, it became a source of very big political authority and influence in Bulgaria and in Romania, exactly like the British Army and later the American military became arbiter of power in Greece. If we have some time at the end, maybe we could continue and say some words about the Greece. Well, what also with the Red Army to Bulgaria and to Romania came back the exile communist leaders who were residing in Moscow during the war. Now, in these two predominantly agrarian countries, the communist parties were not a mass party. They didn't have a big support. And Anna Pauker, it's one of the exiled communist, Romanian communists returning from Moscow. She's going to be the future foreign minister of Romania, admitted frankly that the Romanian Communist Party had about 1,000 members in the entire country. So that's where the peoples they started with. And the local Communist Party in Bulgaria was larger and better organized than its Romanian counterpart, but still it was a tiny party in Bulgaria as well. The biggest party was logically the Agrarian Party, the so-called Agrarian Union, and it was corresponding with the fact that this was agrarian country. But let's say the communists in Bulgaria, they had at least 3 advantages which few other parties in Eastern Europe could enjoy. First of all, it was a very strong military organized party who was fighting the resistance. Secondly, there were no frictions within the party. It was a fully pro-Soviet party. And third, and this was unlike in Romania, the popular suspicion of Soviet presence was less intense than elsewhere in Eastern Europe, I mean. Unlike in Romania, the majority of Bulgarians, for historical reasons, had pro-Russian sentiment, and that was what the communists started to make capital of it, and that's why the communists in Bulgaria began very early to take the initiative and to take their grip over the power. Now let's see the map, the next slide, to see how, you see this is still during the war, and here with the blue you see how they come to Romania and to Bulgaria, but then further to Hungary and Slovakia, which were by that time also fascist countries, Nazi Germany allies, and that's why they tried also to secure their influence in Hungary as well, because it was on the way to Germany. And now let's look at the communist takeovers in these 2 countries. So please move to the next slide, number 5. Yes. And here I have chosen 2 sentences which I think explain the whole transition period from multi-party society to one-party system, and from market economy to the planet economy. But first of all, the political dimensions of the presence of the Soviet troops in this territory. Now, in common language, this tactic could be described as salami tactics. It's salami is the whole, let's say, spectrum of parties, and salami tactics is cutting the edges up to it comes to the communist full control. And this process was the same everywhere. We'll look next time at Central Europe, where the party system was more developed and more democratically organized. But anyway, the muster and the process is the same everywhere. First, everywhere the communists were strengthening their grip on key state institutions, especially the state security apparatus. And everywhere they're using pressure from below, and everywhere they're using mechanism behind the scenes. So if we look at the formula of this government, let's see the next slide. Thank you very much. It's the same. Everywhere there was a system of so-called people's democracies implemented. And this was a general coalition, of course, anti-fascist parties. in which, of course, the communists were very active members. And I said they had their grip on the state security apparatus. Usually Ministry of Interior was under their control, and police. And general military staff, of course, because the war is going on, they needed also support from Bulgaria. There was an army which supported Soviet troops on their way to the West. And propaganda ministry, it was also very important to them. So in these coalitions in Bulgaria and Romania were, of course, agrarian parties and social democrats. And miscellaneous democrats were held together also, or included in the first governments. And these governments had not more than an emergency program, which was the push of fascist land reform in Romania, but not in Bulgaria, and other acts of social equalization, what the post-war situation was calling for. Now, from the point of view of communists, of course, this was not a genuine situation. It was, let's say, just transition regime, reflecting a situation which was not, let's say, ripe for the true communism. To non-communist members of this government, to the other parties, it was, let's say, popular front coalition, leftist in tone and policy direction, but somehow balanced between the different parties. So it's obviously these two approaches could not last very long because they were potentially controversial. And let's say in Bulgaria and Romania, they lasted only a few months, while in countries with a longer democratic tradition, like Czechoslovakia, these people's democracies phase lasted more than two years. So it depends from country to country, but in Bulgaria it was from the very beginning clear what's going on, and that is not be long-term decision for the political power. And the end of this first phase is the authentic leaders of the democratic parties had been forced out, with special preference to these parties which were perceived by the communists as a potential threat for the power. And now let's look now what the Soviet representatives who come with the army, what role they played in these two countries. Now, I said for the Bulgarian communists, they had a strong grip from the very beginning, and there was no need for the Soviet authorities to intervene very openly. Was no need. It doesn't mean, of course, that they are not prepared to do so, but just was no need. So they stayed as advisors. They stayed apart from what is going on in the country. While in Romania, the Soviet representatives played a leading role from the very beginning. Of course, because Romania laid on the main way the Soviet troops were going to take in the direction of Germany. So in the February 1945, the Soviet deputy foreign minister Andrei Vyshinsky just arrived to Bucharest, met with the King Michael, and forced him to dismiss his prime minister and to appoint instead of him a pro-communist Petru Groza. Petru Groza was not a very known leader in Romania. He headed just Diplomats Front, one tiny organization of rural fellow travelers. So his destiny was to form the first communist-dominated government in Romania, and it was led by himself, by Petru Groza. Now in Bulgaria, I said the Soviet representatives remained behind the scene. The first government of so-called Fatherland's Front was formed with different component parties, agrarians and social democrats and Zveno and so forth. Now the dominant force, Agrarian Union had many different fractions, and the biggest one, which was led by Georgi Dimitrov Gemeto. He has the same name like the communist leader, but he was commonly known as Gemeto, exactly to distinguish him from his namesake. So he chose not to join the cabinet, the Fatherland's Front government, though he remained secretary of his party. Now, by that time, beginning of 1945, the BKP, the Bulgarian Communist Party, felt strong enough to start attacking his opponents, and the biggest opponents he was perceiving was exactly the Agrarian Union. And so they started, through propaganda, what we spoke about, that insinuated that Gemeto was a British agent who would involve Bulgaria in a civil war, exactly what is happening in Greece. And already in January 1945, at Soviet insistence, Gemeto was forced out of the party and out of the country. He was dismissed as leader of the party. And so the BKP deprived its biggest opponent, the Agrarian Union, of its genuine head by forcing him out of the country. He fled to the USA in very attractive way. He was just helped to leave the country, and he was replaced in the party at the top of Agrarian Union by Nikola Petkov, a minister without portfolio, who communists perceived as more compatible to them. And some months later, the exile leaders, Georgi Dimitrov, this time the communist, and his comrade Vasil Karov, they came back to the country and started a strong propaganda campaign in the country. Now, please, let's show the next slide. To the left, you see Gemeto, this Agrarian Union leader, and to the right, Stalin with Georgi Dimitrov. This is also met by end or shortly after end of the war. Now let's move to slide 8, where we'll look at the second coalitions. This phase starts with the democratic parties having new leadership. There is still free speech and free meetings. It means the opposition is not deprived of all means to make propaganda or make meetings, but the communist propaganda is growing and the pressure is growing. And there is also implementation of stick and carrot tactic in different degree. What was in Romania, it was the land reform, where a very speedy, maybe in 1 month, they distributed land to the poor people. in order to get more support, of course. At the same time, they started mobbing the new leadership of the agrarian parties. But in Bulgaria, this land reform was not possible to be implemented because the land already was distributed, so there was nothing to be distributed. And the communists established enormous influence through the mass social organizations, trade unions, youth and women organization, professional bodies, and these started to press the society through rent-a-mob demonstrations, mass demonstrations in both countries done, and also intimidation or liquidation of political opponents started very soon. So now, and in Bulgaria, the existing police forces, they were disbanded, and an entire new organization was created, which was, as I already mentioned, totally dependent on the total communist control. And this militia in Bulgaria arrested or simply killed, I want to just give the data not to mix them, thousands of employees of former regime clerks as alleged war criminals. And there were more alleged war criminals per capita than everywhere else in Bulgaria, in the small Bulgarian. The government, the Fatah Front government, admitted to 11,767 victims, but the real figure was almost certainly over 50,000, and some authors say perhaps as many as twice that number. So carrot tactic was not that big in Bulgaria, but stick was very strong. So land reform could not be deployed in Bulgarian. So what remained then intimidation and liquidation of political opponents, and that's what happened up to the last phase, which is a monolithic control of a single party. Now, let's say there was little cooperation between the opposition and the communists in Romania from the very beginning. And there were regular outbursts of violence very, very soon. Because the country's largest group of workers, the railwaymen, had formed paramilitary bands, which were caught here and there to restore the order, what means to bring the opposition to accept the new rules. And it was done regularly during 1945-1946. And when on 19th of November 1946, manipulated elections in Romania were held, in the result, all power in Romania was already in communist hands. Now, a day before, on 18th of November, took place also the first post-war elections in Bulgaria. Now, by that time, there were very few people, I don't think very many, who knew about these percentage agreements. For sure, the opposition leaders, Nicole Petkov of Agrarians and Costa Luce from Social Democrats, didn't know, because they had a false impression of commitment of the West to the Bulgarian future democratic government, and so they blindly advised their supporters to boycott the elections. Well, it was to expect Fatherland's Front won 86% of the vote, and the result was also to be expected. There was no opposition genuine opposition in the new parliament. Next step was on 8th of September 1946, when a plebiscite was held, which resulted in declaration of republic. The kingdom became republic, and King Simon II and his family left Bulgaria. Of course, next step, 27th of October 1946, elections were held for the Grand National Assembly. Grand National Assembly has to make a new constitution for the republic, and this manipulated election gave the communists a majority in the General National Assembly with 365 seats to the opposition's 101. And by that time, Georgy Dimitrov, the communist leader, became also the prime minister. Now, back to the carrot and stick practice. While the parliament was dealing to draw up a new constitution, the political tribunals were going on with full power. The so-called People's Court in Bulgaria dealt a huge blow to the former regime. After dubious trial, the three wartime regents, 160 parliamentary deputies, and a number of politicians were convinced of various crimes against the people. The prosecution demanded 50 death sentences and was given twice that number, the execution being carried out immediately. According to some sources, in space of 6 months, 2,138 people were executed and as many again received life sentences. And now, in order to illustrate exactly this correlation between international development and domestic impact, let's say this correlation is day for day, because on the 4th of June 1947, the US Senate ratified the peace treaty with Bulgaria. Exactly the next day, the 5th of June, Nikolai Petkov was arrested at the parliament, and he was subjected to one of most disgraceful show trials known in Eastern Europe. Now, second correlation, the 20th of September the same year, 1947, the peace treaty came into force. And 3 days later, on 23rd of September, Petkov was executed. He was handcuffed. And after the destruction of Petkov, BKP moved rapidly to full takeover. In December the same year, the so-called Dimitrov Constitution, drafted under Soviet guidance, was passed by the Grand National Assembly, and a communist party's control over the country was complete. And now let's move to the last slide. Division of the Balkans becomes division of the world. Now, we will speak only about the Truman Doctrine, because the Marshall Plan is more connected with the Central Europe. So we'll speak about this in the second part of this lecture. Let's say some words about Greece. Now, back to the percentage agreement, it's obviously that with this agreement, Stalin cynically abandoned the Greek communists, and they were very, very big power at that time. Let's say that Churchill admitted that when the British army came to Greece in September 1944, when the Russians came to Bulgaria and Romania, the Greek communist resistance army had in control already 4/5 of the country. So it was a reverse situation. That the British had to twist the political development in order to bring the Greece in the Western sphere. By that time, however, from Molotov come the instructions, Soviet Union would not support an armed Greek communist takeover, nor would be sending any weaponry to Hellas. And under these conditions, in February, the disarmament of the Greek Communist Army began. Now, the British Army was there, but the problem was the post-war Britain, or at the end of the war, Britain balance of payments was that bad that the new Labour government acknowledged we cannot support our presence, our military presence in Greece. And that's what they announced to the Americans. And then, of course, Truman rose to the challenge and announced his doctrine in March 1947. He announced to the Congress that in the future the US government would support, I quote, free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities by outside pressure. And he said, the world is essentially divided in two. On one side are totalitarian and enslaved peoples. On the other side are the free peoples. He looked at the Republicans, and Republicans by that time wanted back to their isolationist program, and asked them, which side are you on? If you are on the side of the free people, give me $400 million. And that's what happened. The money was granted within the weeks. Shortly thereafter, US military missions traveled to Greece, where they promised aid to the right-wing government. Let's say military help was given also to Turkey, because by that time there was Soviet pressure over the Turkish government to open the straits. But it was not that dangerous situation like in Greece, where the local communists were that strong. So the Cold War was destined to start in the Balkans, and the Truman Doctrine became a cornerstone of a new interventionist policy of the US in European affairs. Now, what is missing, I'll just mention now, but we'll do this in detail, the Soviet answer, Stalin answer, and it has to do more with domestic development in Czechoslovakia, and decision which was taken at Sklavska Poremba in September 1947, but that's what we'll continue the next time. Anyway, the two camps theory was also accepted by the Soviets by that time, and so the two camps came into existence. By the end of 1947, it was apparent that with the Big Three is over and the Cold War had replaced the international consultations. Thank you for your attention. I hope I was not that long, maybe longer. I think I had maybe a bit more, but hope not that much. Thank you again. So do you want to make, yeah, that's how it looks now. These are the borders, maybe show again. You can see here is the border before beginning of the war, and you see the shifting of the borders with the three Baltic lands incorporated. So we have, let's discuss this. We have system of Soviet dependence or alienation after the war. We have enlarged Soviet Union with absorbing no legislation about this, with the three Baltic countries, shifting of the border, that's what we will discuss the next time, taking Eastern Curzon Line, taking eastern Poland and shifting the West Polish border further to the west, and absorption of Bessarabia, which is also absorbed. And then we have second dependence, which is these people democracies, which are formerly independent countries, but are going to be incorporating what's going to be the socialist system, what we'll discuss also the next time. These are two fascist countries, Bulgaria and Romania, and Hungary, two Central European fascist countries, Hungary and Slovakia, and two nations which had good contacts with Stalin during the war, with communists in Czechoslovakia and in Poland. And then we have independent countries like Austria and Finland, which are independent, have their own domestic development, political development, but they are not allowed to join any anti-Soviet union or whatever military bloc. So this was, and then we have this part of Germany, which is going to be East Germany, DDR. This we'll discuss also next time. So that was. If you have comments or questions, please.
Thank you a lot. Interesting and very important lecture and presentation. Dear friends, I invite you to ask your question. Please introduce yourself and ask the question. Okay.
Colleges of the Dmitry Mikolenko. Very glad to hear you. And can I ask question in Russian?
Да, конечно, можете. Я понимаю все.
Да.
Можно, я стараюсь ответить.
Да. У меня на самом деле 3 вопроса. Я преподаю подобный курс вот нашим студентам-магистрам, которые сегодня присутствуют на лекции. И хотел бы задать первый вопрос в отношении проектов Балканской Федерации, который Советский Союз продвигал с 1944 года. И хотел бы у вас уточнить, по вашему мнению, какое все-таки место эти проекты занимали во внешней политике Советского Союза и какую роль они оказали на советизацию Балкан, и почему все-таки они оказались неуспешными? Question about Balkan Federation.
Да, понял. Значит, вы хотите говорить о проекте Балканской Федерации и почему он не осуществился или как? А как связан с
Советский Союз его продвигал достаточно сильно с 1944 года. Попытка объединения Югославии, Болгарии, как раз, возможно, Румынии, Греции. Но позднее от этого они отказались фактически. И как раз уже к 1947 году эти попытки затихают. То есть что послужило причинами, что Советский Союз не стал усиливать давление на балканские страны, чтобы создать более региональное объединение, а не пойти по пути воссоздания национальных государств, под своим контролем.
Понятно. Значит, я думаю, в первой о Югославии, как мы увидели на этом споразумении, это было 50-50, потому что это значит, что каждая сила могла только воздействовать только ограниченно. Во-первых. Во-вторых, я думаю, очень важно, что Югославия, как и Албания, имела достаточную силу, там не было советской армии. Кстати, Титу был такой популярный военный лидер, что он имел поддержку, большую общественную поддержку. И он не был, как сказать, обязан, ему не было нужно советская подкрепа. Мы знаем, что в начале Димитров тоже очень был этой федерации. Я думаю, в конце концов, реальная политика Тита просто остался таким вождем, каким он был. Он был национальный, или, скажем, югославский вождь, коммунистический вождь. Он имел свою власть, и он думаю, в югославских архивах не работал, но я думаю, он не был согласным делить с Сталином или с каким-то другим. Димитров шел так далеко встречено Тито, как Сталин этот проект поддерживал. В моменте, когда Сталин уже этот проект не поддерживал, уже было ясно, что Димитров будет делать, что Сталин хочет. Кстати, дело другой деталь. Много людей были политически преследованными после промены этой линии в тюрьме, так, потому что был такой славянский съезд в Белграде на конце войны, и потом разрыв Тито с Сталиным, и все эти люди, которые были в федерации, и все, были политически преследованными.
Спасибо. И второй вопрос, который чаще всего я не могу на него найти ответ, но в нашей литературе, других исследователей, это роль церкви в момент установления коммунистических режимов. Как складывались отношения между церковью и новым политическим режимом? Какую роль церковь сыграла или пыталась играть в этих процессах? Как мощный гражданский общественный институт.
Да, значит, если мы сделаем формулу, и мы сделаем эту формулу, когда будем говорить о Центральной Европе или о этих странах, которые будут члены Советского блока, конечно, там были процессы против католической церкви. В Болгарии тоже были. В Болгарии были тоже много в этих спонтанных террористических акциях, о которых я говорила. Кстати, Народный суд, большая часть, не больше, но немногие от этих, которые получили присуды, уже не были в жизни. А между ними было и много духовников. И потом был процесс против протестантских против протестантских миссионеров. И так вот, пропаганда не была только, скажем, слово или убеждение, или все. Пропаганда, конец концов, означала политический процесс и присуды. В том числе и против духовников.
Спасибо большое. Хотелось бы отдельно вам еще передать приветствие от Сергея Юрьевича Страшнюка, нашего коллеги. Он, к сожалению, сегодня не смог подсоединиться, но попросил обязательно вам передать от себя наилучшие поздравления и приветствия. Надеется все-таки на скорую встречу в Харькове.
Да, я надеюсь тоже. Но пока держим пальцы, чтобы стали здоровыми.
Да. Спасибо большое за лекцию.
И спасибо тоже. До свидания всем.
Just a moment. Госпожа Готовская, can I ask one question about resistance of to communist power in Bulgaria? Why this topic is not very popular now in contemporary Bulgaria? Why this topic not don't research in contemporary Bulgaria? What do you think about it? What reason of this situation?
Well, I think one of the problems is that there are very many archives which were burned out, consciously or unconsciously, planned or unplanned. You know, there was a fire in the party central, and there are archives burned out. So this is one of the reasons. We are historians, we have to have documents, we work with documents, otherwise we cannot come to the proper logical research results. This is first topic. And this way I exactly make comparison with Czechoslovakia, which Czech lands now, which I follow. I could say they not only preserved, but also published all the documents from, let's say, Velvet Revolution time, face to face. You could look, you could read, published also the last, let's say, consultation among the communist leaders, the last discussions, the last decisions, the student demonstration, everything is there with name. And then there's a lot of memories which are published there also from the communist leaders as well. And this is not the case in Bulgaria. There were some memoirs, but not of very big communist functionaries, very, very important, which could give an idea how this was developing last months and last years. And the second reason, maybe, I think, is that in Bulgaria, it was different development. The first post 1989 elections were won by the communists. And I think it played also a big role. They got just more time to reorganize, to dress over their cloth, to brush their image and things like that. So I think the Secret Services archives are open, and that's a good thing. But I'm not sure whether this is a substantial part there and what was burned out and what remained. So it's heavy to say and to evaluate. So this is my explanation.
Yes, thank you a lot. Госпожа Готовska, it's very interesting and it's very useful for us. And I hope we will see you not only online next year.
Yes.
You will come in Kharkiv University. Dear colleagues, maybe you want to ask any question? Okay.
Maybe if they have additional questions, they could send me a mail, maybe, also.
Okay.
Possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Госпожа Готовska. Goodbye and good luck, and I hope we will see you in Kharkiv. Dear friends, thank you a lot for your participation, and I invite you for our next activities. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much for me too. Bye bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.